Hi, and welcome back to PGTV. I'm Katie Beck, and I hope you brought your parachute because today we're taking on the long disputed topic of the dreaded fiscal cliff. And I'm here with two of my colleagues who are uniquely qualified to weigh in on this debate. Please welcome former staff director of the House Appropriations Committee, Jim Dyer, and former communications director of the House Armed Services Committee, Josh Hawley. Welcome, guys, and thank you both for being here. So here we are. It's been 4 weeks since the election. We are 32 days, roughly, from heading over the fiscal cliff, and we have no deal. In fact, despite what has been 2 weeks of talks and a lot of back and forth, negotiations seem to be moving at a snail's pace. And if you're listening to John Boehner, we are almost nowhere. So how did we get here? And with all eyes on the clock, is this all political theater or really real gridlock?
I think it's true gridlock, but it's not impossible to get out of here. I think what you look for, we've had a week of posturing and political statements on both sides. Now what I'm be looking for would be 2 weeks of hard but quiet negotiations, perhaps away from the public back and forth, with the hope that some kind of a framework could be created, roughly 2 weeks from today, that you could basically have something on the congressional floor the week before Christmas. To me, that's a palatable scenario because everyone knows the extent of the problem. I think the issue becomes a starting point and trying to get through what you need to do, at least short term, to get yourself on a path to restoring some fiscal stability to this budget.
Josh, want anything?
Yeah, I think Jim covered it pretty well there. That we have seen a lot of the rhetoric. You had the president last week who came out with a proposal. And a lot of this is just positioning at this point, so the negotiations can move forward. And that's what we'll start to see in the next 2 weeks, for both sides. The congressional Republicans, the president, and congressional Democrats begin to actually, nothing is new that we're talking about. You've identified most of the cuts. We know what the tax extenders are. So now it's starting to put together that package that can pass both chambers and be signed into law by the president.
So, on that note, and sort of to elaborate on what both of you sort of mentioned, what is the source of the real holdup? And can you walk us through what it really will take practically over the next few weeks to get to 218 votes in the House and roughly 50 or 60 in the Senate?
The two phrases you'll hear a lot in this town are comprehensive tax reform and comprehensive entitlement reform. And I think ultimately we will need both of those things. I do not believe, given the complexity of the issues, you would solve those issues within the next 2 weeks. I think within the next 2 weeks, what you would need to do would be to put some kind of a limited package together that gets you started. There are tax extenders, there's the alternate minimum tax, there's the so-called doc fix, there's a sequester with a sequester delay with a potential pay for it. These are things you can do. There's also a need for some disaster aid and a need for some crop disaster assistance aid as well. The two toughest pieces of the puzzle, in my judgment, are the extension of the Bush tax cuts and the need for the lifting of the debt ceiling at some point in time in February. These are very, very difficult issues that really go to the heart of the political debate that both parties have just come through, and it's a debate that really won't go away, and there's going to have to be some conciliation on the part of both sides on these two big issues if we're to get through the next month.
And Katie, you mentioned the magic number of 218 in the House. That's really what you're trying to hit there, and whatever package that you do put forward, I think Jim's exactly right. You're going to see some type of bridge that then sets up the framework for broader negotiations next year. Now the question is, how do you get to that 218? If you've got both the right and the left who have staked out positions, so how do we cobble this together and make it convincing not only for members of the members on the right, members on the left, but also convincing for financial services institutions and for Wall Street? How do you make it significant enough that the cliff is not that I guess the street doesn't react negatively to whatever the temporary solution is? And
we're hearing more and more from Democrats who view the election as just more ammunition, to your points, for them to stick to their guns on increased taxes and avoiding major cuts to entitlement programs. So, as you suggested, I mean, is this really the political crux of the whole debate? And what's really at stake for the two parties politically and the president?
I think the crux of the debate is much broader than that. I think we have had an election and we all know the outcome. But I think the crux of this debate is whether or not this government will put in place a long-term plan to balance its fiscal and budgetary affairs, something it has not done. This will not be easy because many of the programs that are at the heart of concerns over spending are so-called entitlements. They're contracts that people have with their government to provide payments. And these contracts, whether they're in Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, a whole host of things, these are important to people's lives. So the crux here is not just can you manage these costs, but can you put the system of revenue in place that you can pay for these things? Because the country's economic growth really depends upon getting a budget, a multi-year budget plan, but it also depends on getting a budget plan that is more in balance and that does send a positive message to the financial markets. I would also say, with regard, Josh touched on it, I would also say that at the end of the day in this town, it's not just going to be the plan, it's going to be the words and the verbiage that lead up to the plan. Everyone is watching the financial markets, and the markets will not only look at what this institution produces, but it will look at the rhetoric surrounding that plan. And in many cases, that is the type of thing that is going to affect the bond markets, it's going to affect the rating agencies. They're going to want to see a level of seriousness and conciliation here that will make them feel good about investment in the future.
And increasingly, to Jim's point, Josh, increasingly the debate has started to turn ugly if we're talking about rhetoric. Speaker Boehner has called on the president to show more adult leadership. Minority Leader McConnell has called the president's proposal a step backwards. So, can you just elaborate a little bit more? I mean, how much does rhetoric matter?
Rhetoric matters, especially in a debate of this magnitude. That you have, not only are you speaking to your base, but you're also speaking to the financial markets. You're speaking to your constituents. And they're different when you're in this type of negotiation. You have to, and I think the president's proposal last week and some of the rhetoric you're hearing from the Republicans, that's aimed at their bases right now, so that they can now enter into those negotiations. The president doesn't, one would think the president doesn't want to start his second term and stand in front of the nation with his inaugural address and blame the Republicans and have a very partisan speech. So as we play this out, it's going to be interesting to see how that rhetoric changes, where people like Senator Graham from South Carolina show signs that he might be willing to negotiate. You've seen Senator Durbin as well talk about entitlement reforms. I think it's important to watch those messages that key senators and key members of the House send, that they're willing to negotiate. Congressman Cole's another one of those who's talked about tax rates. That begins to, that rhetoric then begins to soften up and make a deal, give some breathing room for a deal to happen.
And so, we've obviously started to see some of the real ramifications for all of this. Just last week, or just the other day, when Speaker Boehner was in the middle of a live press conference, we saw the Dow drop almost 60 points. So, taking that a step further, what happens if the unthinkable becomes thinkable and we do head over the fiscal cliff?
Well,
where do you all put the odds of that happening?
Well, first, let me say that the law requires that if nothing happens by December 31st, first, the tax code will revert to the pre-Bush tax cut rates. It will create, if projected out over a year, it will create a significant amount of additional revenue out of the system, I believe close to about $600 billion, having the debt, if you will. The problem is it'll also probably create a recession. The second thing that happens is the president will be required by law on the 2nd of January to issue a report saying that he has cut approximately $110 billion out of the existing federal budget, half of which will come from defense and half of which will come from non-defense. These cuts will not happen on the 2nd of January, but they will signal a series of actions that will ultimately take these numbers down. And in the process of doing so, the Congress has one option available to it, under the terms of the Budget Act, and that is they could offer an alternate to the sequester within 15 days of its being offered, which would obviate it and which would maybe make some alternate suggestions on reductions or delay the sequester entirely. So there are some ways out of this thing, but I think every economist and every politician and every observer worth their salt has conceded that if you allow these two things to happen, this combination of tax increases and spending cuts, that you will drive this country back into a recession. And Josh mentioned the president's second inauguration. It's a tough way to start your the second term of your presidency with the country plunged back into a recession. And I would think that that would be the thing that all of these folks would want to avoid.
And Katie, you asked the key question that's on everybody's mind, including members of Congress and senators and staff on Capitol Hill, from the investment community to the main street of mom and pop stores, etc. Is what are the odds of this getting done? The good news is both sides of the debate think that sequestration would be devastating. They believe that we can't go to the fiscal cliff. So something will be done. The question is, what does that look like? And I think that's where the big debate right now, and the parlor game in DC is what's going to get done. Is going to be some type of bridge to be set up, or are we actually going to go over the cliff because of the rhetoric you mentioned earlier? But the good news is that both sides see the damage that going off the fiscal cliff would cause, which is encouraging in that respect.
Excellent. Does anyone want to add anything else?
No, well, just one thing, Mary. You talked about the election, and it's true. The president has won. Democrats in charge of the Senate, Republicans in charge of the House. The president doesn't just have to worry about the Republicans. He's got to worry about the clock. And the clock, it really is a problem here because these are decisions that have been put off all year. This is not new. This is a phenomenon that everyone knew was going to come. And everybody basically said, let's put it off till after the election. Okay, it's after the election and it's time to do something. And it's not like anyone's being caught by surprise. But the reality is if you're the president and you're his people, it's not just the Republicans you've got to deal with, but it's the reality of this clock ticking and these things happening, and these are very negative things. And to people who say, oh, let the government go over the fiscal cliff and then we'll put it back together again. If you think it's hard now, trust me, it is much more difficult once the new economic structure is laid in place, and it's a damaging structure to try to put these things back in place. So we can only hope that doesn't happen.
Well, thanks so much to you both. We appreciate your insight as we all continue to wait here on the edge of our seats as this debate continues to unfold. And for further projections and perspectives, keep your eyes on the PG pipeline.